It's Arthur Tudor's birthday today, so we're going to talk about that on Tea Time History Chat Live. Welcome. I'm streaming live on Instagram, YouTube and Facebook. I'm actually live today, not like last week where I was sort of live, not live because I was actually away, but I'm back. And yeah, so I thought we'll talk about Arthur Tudor because it is the anniversary of his birth today. Got some other things to share with you as well, some interviews that have gone live, some things you can look forward to. And of course, as usual, feel free to drop me a hello in the chat. Hello, Deborah. And also welcome to you if you're watching on catch up or you're listening on the podcast, which is also available to you if you do happen to miss the live. So yeah, please let me know where you're coming from, where you're watching from. Is that the right terminology? And also if you've got any, I don't know, comments, questions as we go through, let me know and I will do my best, if at all possible, to answer them. So I realised that I rarely introduce myself. So I know most of you know who I am. Hi, Pamela, over there in Ohio. My name is Philippa Lacey-Brawl, and I own and run a company called British History Tours. We also have British history events. So this is how come I'm talking to you about history, because it is it's my first love, my bread and butter, and it's the best way to connect with people as well. I've found, because we're all into the same thing. Marianne, hi. Brian's down there in Cornwall. Marianne is in Edmonton. Where have we got? Sabrina is in Italy. Apologies if I have missed your hello coming up. Tiffany's in Hungary. Dee is in LA. Cecilia is, we've got lots of people in Italy. Red Bottom Queen Bee, Naples. Cecilia, Italy. In Morgenda, I don't know how to pronounce your handle, is on Orlando. Someone from Hungary. Oh my goodness. So we've got people from all over. Thank you very much. Linda is, I know where you are, over there in America. Darla in Indiana. Nadia is in London. It's raining. Brian, is it raining where you are as well? Yeah. Autumn has descended. Ali is over there in Philadelphia working. Oh, outside of Philadelphia. I thought you were saying you're working outside just to rub in the fact that it's very wet and windy here now. Mark's in San Francisco. Jill's over there in Sweden. H Pelicano watching from Santiago. Ooh, nice. Nice. Bobby's in Indiana. Jenna, hi. Joining me on YouTube today. Actually, if there's anyone who's got the choice between Instagram and YouTube, you might want to pop over to my YouTube today or Facebook, because I do have some pictures to share. And unfortunately, there's no way of putting them on Instagram. Well, I can put them on afterwards, but while I'm talking, because I thought I can show you some of the places associated with Arthur Tudor, who is our topic for today, because we're landing on the anniversary of his birthday. Today or yesterday, midnight birth. Catherine's in Kansas. Ali, thank you very much. Reaching people all over the world. Yes, it's very exciting. Brian, not raining at the moment. Oh, well, yeah, you've either had it or it's to come. Bish, sorry, with the handles, sometimes I can't pronounce them, but over there in India, some of them are very long. Callie's in New Orleans. Wonderful. So yeah, so if you have the opportunity to maybe watch me on YouTube, I'm going to be showing some pictures, and it's I'm actually British History on YouTube. You can go to youtube.com/British History, and I'm there. British History Tours on Facebook, and you'll also see them there. History After Dark we do have later. Brian's just mentioning that because he's off to salsa class tonight, so I don't think we can compete with that, Brian, to be fair. Beverly's in Kent. You might have the rain to come. It's been pretty heavy. So anyway, let's get on. Thank you. I have some thank yous as well because as you know, if you're supporting me with badges on Instagram, stars on Facebook, and super chats on YouTube, I am always incredibly grateful. It does help me keep going. All of this is sort of out of my own pocket, if you like. So it does genuinely help me to actually keep going, produce content. But the best way to support me, because it means I can give back, is on my Patreon, which is patreon.com/British history. And so I have some shout outs with new members over the last week. Renee, Margaret, Susan, and Diane have all joined. And they've joined at a perfect time because we've just finished our last book in our most recent book, should I say, in book club, which is part of the Patreon. It was Houses of Power by Simon Thurley, talking about the Tudor sort of palaces and castles and houses and all sorts. It was an incredibly interesting book, and we are now starting the next one. So if you're interested in joining a historical book club, my Patreon may well be the place for you to go. We are about to start reading The Sisters Who Would Be Queen by Leanda de Lisle. It's about the Grey sisters, so Jane Grey, Catherine Grey, and what was the third one? Oh my God, I had a mind blank. Is it Mary? Oh, someone tell me. Catherine, Jane, someone else. Anyway, that's what the book's about. I haven't read it yet, so I have read it once, but that we will be delving into that. And the book club meeting is 12th of November. So get on that if you fancy that. It's patreon.com/British history. Right. Anyway, we're going to talk about Arthur, aren't we? Arthur Tudor, the eldest son of Henry VII and his wife, Elizabeth of York. Of course, this is the marriage that was supposed to end the Wars of the Roses, bring together the Lancaster and York factions. And really, though, it's not the marriage itself that does that. It's the children of that marriage. They are the embodiment of the joining of those two lines of the royal family, which had been warring for such a long time that in living memory, people probably it would have been their reality. So Arthur Tudor is born probably 20th of September 1486, and he's born at Winchester. And if you're on YouTube and Facebook, like I say, I've got some pickies for you. And there is a very specific reason why he's born at Winchester. Henry VII is aware that his claim to the throne is tenuous, although he is the only one left. But there's issues, and he is constantly, from the get-go, looking for ways to show legitimacy, show being fit to rule, that they're the right dynasty. His marriage to Elizabeth of York, of course, is part of that. So the birth of their firstborn is incredibly important, and the everything around it. So Winchester is the ancient capital of England. It's incredibly interesting. Actually, if you're interested in Anglo-Saxon history, Winchester comes up a lot as the capital of Wessex, who then take over sort of the rest. Anyway, that's a bit simple. But anyway, that's not what we're talking about today. But anyway, Winchester has got a very long history. It is synonymous with sort of the kings, the ancient kings. This is the connection Henry VII is trying to get you to have in your mind when his son, as it turns out, lucky them, is born. It is also the place that is supposed to be the ancient site of where King Arthur, this legendary king, had met with his Knights of the Round Table. And there is the Great Hall of this castle, Winchester Castle, still exists. So many rabbit holes, Jenna, I know. I have to stop my tangents. Yeah, the Great Hall still exists. We're going here next year. I'll tell you a bit more about that later on. But the interestingly, if you're interested in Anne Boleyn's history, the Great Hall at Winchester is supposed to be very similar to that which was at the Tower of London, where Anne Boleyn and her brother George had their trials. That again, there's a tangent, but it's slightly less of one. We're in the similar time period. So the Round Table is at Winchester. It's actually created by Edward III, but it's there. This is the ancient capital of England, and these are the connections that Henry VII is wanting you to make back to a legendary king of Arthur, who they believed existed. That's another wormhole we won't go for, rabbit hole we won't go down. And the links to the actual kings that you've seen. Beverly says it's tenuous but not non-existent, isn't it? I think is what you said. What you mean? His mother's line was illegitimate. His father's line, yes, was that he was the son of the widow of Henry V. Yeah, it's definitely tenuous, and also by this point, it's less of a York versus Lancaster type idea by the time you get to the Battle of Bosworth. But that's the most simple way of framing it, because you had people who turned out for either side who wouldn't have been on that side had it have been earlier on in the Wars of the Roses. Anyway, again, that's another rabbit hole. I keep wanting to say wormhole, rabbit hole, same thing to go down. But Henry is clearly on a big marketing effort to make sure that his dynasty is likened, is synonymous in people's minds with ancient kings, ancient places. They're in the right place. So Arthur being born at Winchester, Karen, fuck off. Just go then. Sorry, everybody. So if I'm not the speaker for you, move along. There are plenty of people talking about history on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. Just move along. So sorry about that, everyone. Didn't mean to swear in the middle of a live. So yes, he's born at Winchester. Now, Elizabeth of York has been made to go. Interestingly, he's born at 35 weeks or 35 weeks from their wedding. And although he's not seen as being ill, it is thought that he is premature. They don't. I mean, who would know? Who would know? But it's not likely that Henry VII and Elizabeth of York slept together before the wedding. So it's likely he is a little bit premature. So it's a good job Elizabeth had got to Winchester. So otherwise these connections couldn't have been made. Of course, his name is Arthur. Again, this is to invoke these links. Henry VII was superb at understanding the power of language, symbols. He got it, and actually that continues with his son Henry VIII and with his granddaughter Elizabeth I. Iconography, visuals. There's more evidence of that a little bit later on as well when we'll have a look at where he's buried. Because you can't really talk about Arthur without talking about the fact that he died early, can you? Spoiler alert if you don't already know that. So he's born at Winchester at 35 weeks, and that has led some people to sorry, Katie. I don't know what that was about. Sorry, someone was making comments about how I wasn't a good speaker on Instagram, which is fine, but I don't understand the requirement to make the comment. This is a live, I'm not scripted. Yeah. I don't understand when there's so much stuff to be watched. Just move on and watch something else. It's fine. Don't know why it has to take the time to make a comment. Anyway, let's not give her any more time. So, where did I get to? So yeah, so they're at Winchester. He's christened in Winchester Cathedral, which is a fascinating place in itself. Again, this is the burial place of kings of Anglo-Saxon England, so pre-Norman conquest England, and it's Katie thought we're going straight into had mode. Yeah. Oh, I'll talk about had later as well, because I'll remind everyone when we're going live and what we're talking about tonight. So yeah, so Winchester Cathedral is where he's christened. So his father isn't present at the birth. He's still in London, which gives rise to this idea. I know what I was going to say. Gives rise to the idea, or more evidence for the fact that he was actually born earlier than expected. And that has meant that I think sometimes, because we know that he dies young, he dies at the age of 16, that he 15 or 16, doesn't it? 16. That he was always sickly, that somehow being premature meant that he was always sickly. But that seems to be something that just comes up because of how we know it ends. So he's a bonny little lad. He's fine. At 6 weeks, though, now this is something I hadn't quite grasped, just how young he was when he was set up in his own household. 6 weeks old. He was 6 weeks old. So really, Arthur is not brought up in his parents' presence at all. He's brought up under the watchful eye of Lady Elizabeth Darcy, who sort of oversaw his household, and he was at Farnham Castle, excuse me, sorry, but it was actually the seat of a home of the Bishop of Winchester. It wouldn't have been his seat. Bishop of Winchester. Very comfortable. Not particularly. It must have been secure in some way, because Henry VII is not going to be letting his only child at this point somewhere where he doesn't feel that he is very safe. But he's there with his own household. So from day dot, really, he's not brought up by his parents, which I'm thinking would be alien to Elizabeth of York, who was brought up with her mother very closely, and of course she is able to mother Henry, who becomes Henry VIII, and their daughters Margaret and Mary and Edmund. So it must have been quite painful, I think, for Elizabeth of York to not be able to bring up her only at this point son. But anyway, she doesn't. He did, and he's not at court, which again is slightly curious. And there's interesting discussion and speculation about why that would be. Why is Arthur not brought up in the presence of sort of Henry VII? If he's being brought up to be king, which of course he is, then doesn't he need to be around the court? Which is a curious thing when you think that Henry VII had just this problem, that when he came to the throne, only actually just over a year earlier than Arthur's birth, he has to be shown the ropes by his wife, his mother. He's only ever been to court, the English court, once before, Henry VII had, as a boy. And yet Arthur doesn't get that. Maybe there was, who knows, maybe there were plans for something to happen along those lines later on. Margaret Beaufort seems to have had quite a hand in deciding Arthur's education and who would be looking after him. And I must mention, before I forget, that next month, so October, I have an interview with Nicola Tallis, who has written a biography of Margaret Beaufort. That will be out on the 8th of October for patrons and the 15th of October to everyone else. So that will also be available on the podcast. And if you are a paying member of my Substack, which you don't have to be at all, but that is, you get the podcast a week early as well. Jenna says, perhaps that explains why Elizabeth kept the other children with her. Yeah, interesting point. Interesting point. 6 weeks, the baby's gone. So Lady Elizabeth Darcy is overlooking his household until he is about 7, when he goes off to Ludlow Castle. He is tutored, so he gets a very good education, albeit away from actually watching his father run a court and seeing the sort of day-to-day things. But he's taught by the poet laureate of England, a man called Bernard Andre. He teaches him Latin. He teaches him the teachings of ancient Rome. He has a Renaissance scholar in Thomas Linacre. He's taught French by Giles Duez. Don't know how you pronounce that. Duwes. And he has other various tutors. So his education seems to be good. He appears to be a good student. The retelling of his educational abilities, I think, is told a little bit later, after his death, by Bernard Andre's, one of the accounts. And there's always the chance, especially if someone's died, that their accomplishments can be embellished as part of that sort of, don't know, but you can see that it happens more for people who don't. And even when he's alive, as well, he is the heir to the throne. Although someone pointed out, I can't remember where I read it, that had he, I think it was Gareth Streeter, that if he was really not good at his studies, you'd probably have found accounts of him being praised for something else, like his athletic ability or something like that. Sort of divert. Don't talk about his French. Well, I'll come back in a minute, or maybe, in a minute, to the education at the same time that his future wife, Catherine of Aragon, was getting, because it's very curious that despite marriage negotiations happening for Arthur and Catherine of Aragon from a very early age, their educations don't appear to have been aligned, ready for that match. And we'll probably get back to that in a short while. But he so his missing a court and at court education is curious. However, like all parents, and well, this is my insight for being one, you try and repeat the things you think your parents did well and give alternative ways to the things you think they didn't do well. And I'm wondering whether that's what's happening with Henry VII here. He is not raised by Margaret Beaufort. And again, if you watch the interview with me and Nicola, I'm interviewing Nicola Tallis about Margaret Beaufort, we talk about how much she is or is not involved in his upbringing. And maybe he felt that hardened him to whatever was to come in the future. And so maybe that is why Arthur is brought up away from his parents. So it's not so much away from court, but away from his parents. But one thing, so that's one thing that Henry sort of replicated from his upbringing. Something that he turns on its head is the people who Arthur has around him. Henry, I think, recognizes, this is all from reading, and I have a list of sources, by the way, if you want some pointers as to where to go and get more information. Henry recognizes that he didn't have a group of people around him, of other men around him, that he could implicitly trust, other than his uncle Jasper, of course, because he didn't grow up with anybody else, or they didn't. So he puts other young boys of a similar age into Arthur's household to learn with him. I think this is really savvy, because you've got, for instance, later on with Henry VIII, you've got Charles Brandon. He knows him. He can implicitly trust him. Edward VI has the same with Barnaby Fitzpatrick. He knows him. They're loyal. Their loyalty is unquestionable. So he has his school friends in with him. And some of them are wards of Henry VII, but they're powerful people, powerful people's sons, should I say. Where am I? Linda says, I'm fascinated by the accurate story of Margaret Beaufort. I can't say her name today. Much different than the portrayal in the movies. It is. She is just a much more rounded character than is portrayed. Definitely. You wouldn't expect Margaret Beaufort to be a bit of a gambler. Ooh, she liked a bit of a punt. Beverly, it was unusual for Henry to be part of his mother's household for so long. Yeah, being a younger child. And of course, that changed once Arthur died, didn't it? Jenna says, I think the other reason why Henry was kept with his mother for so long which was unheard of, was because his grandmother, Margaret Beaufort, was preparing him for the church. Yes. So yes. Right. Remind me of that if I forget about that later on when we talk about Arthur's death. But Arthur's death had such an impact on everything. We talk about Arthur's death in the interview with Nicola as well, because we'll get onto that in a moment. He does spend some time with his father. He goes hunting. We know he goes hunting with him at Woodstock, because he meets the Milanese ambassador there, who actually comments on Arthur's command of Latin. He's impressed, but he has got some of the best teachers there of Latin, with Bernard Andre being the poet laureate as well. But he's only 11 at the time. So he is showing his abilities. Now, when he is, I wrote this down now, I can't remember. I think when he was 7, might have been when he's about 6 or 7. There is sketchy records, by the way, of Arthur's life. I'm not just being forgetful, but he goes to Ludlow Castle. No, not terribly late. And anyway, you only missed me swearing a bit. We're talking about Arthur Tudor because it is the anniversary of his birth today. A birthday, I suppose, is what we call it. So he's actually based at Ludlow from a really early age. Now, Ludlow Castle is it's in Shropshire. It is on the English-Welsh border. It's in a place called the Marches, and it is the centre of the Council of the Marches, the head of the Council of the Marches, which Arthur technically was as the Prince of Wales, which he was invested as at the age of 3. It is a fairly male dominated household, as you would expect, which is interesting when we think about what happens when he goes back there with his wife later on. But he actually lives in spends time at 2 different places, mainly Ludlow Castle and a place called Tickenhill Manor in a riverside town called Bewdley, which if you visit today, it's very near me, so I'm probably going back to wax lyrical about it. But it is very you'd say it was a Georgian town. And then you look a little bit closer and you see there's Tudor buildings as well. And actually a lot of the Georgian looking buildings are fascias. So they're brick frontages to a timber framed building behind. But the manor itself, incredibly comfortable, lots of land. Arthur enjoyed spending time there. And it was in fact there that the proxy wedding to Catherine of Aragon took place on the 19th of May 1499. Arthur attended it himself, and the Spanish ambassador de Puebla, he stood in for Catherine, who wasn't, of course, in the country yet. She wasn't in the country until 1501. So the proxy wedding occurs in May 1499, and Catherine doesn't actually come to the country until October 1501, and there's a reason for that. So, but before I move on, if you go looking for Tickenhill Manor now, you will not be able to find it. Part of the house still exists, but it is amalgamated into a newer house. I don't think it's a new house, but a newer house, and is completely built up around. It is what we call a housing estate, and you just cannot even envisage where this beautiful manor, significant manor, was. So it's a stopping off point, really, to go to get to Ludlow Castle. If, say, he would move by river, the river runs up from Worcester to Bewdley, and then you could stay at Bewdley and then go off to Ludlow Castle. That's how I would do it. I don't know if they did it. I suppose you could go further up the river as well. But yeah, so Bewdley was quite significant. It's really sad that there's absolutely nothing to show for it now. But the reason Catherine of Aragon doesn't set foot in England until October 1501 is because her parents perceive that there are still threats to the Tudor dynasty, that there are still threats to the family, to Henry, to Arthur, and therefore there would be to Catherine. Marie asks, so the age of Catherine and Arthur. So Catherine is slightly older. She, in fact, I can tell you exactly when she was born. She was born on the 16th of December, 1485, and he's born on the 20th of September, 1486. So there's not quite a year between them. So they're very similar age. Jenna, similar to Eltham Palace. Well, except that at Eltham Palace, you can still see, the foundations. There's a fly going around. You can see the foundations of some of the building. You can see where it's been amalgamated, for want of, you already used that word, but into the Coulthard's Art Deco house, which is fabulous house in its own right as well. Tickenhill, you just cannot tell. In fact, I might Google this afterwards. Google it afterwards on Google Maps and just see if a bird's eye view gives you any better idea. But Catherine of Aragon's parents, Isabella of Castile, Ferdinand of Aragon, the Catholic kings, perceive that there is still a threat to Catherine. Also, Arthur's not being brought up in his mother's presence. Catherine has been always in her mother's presence, whether they are on campaign, whether they're back in the Castle of Granada, wherever they are, Catherine is near to her mother. So she's very she's seen a court in action. She's seen action that Arthur hasn't. But there's still, in 1499, there's still Perkin Walbeck and Edward Plantagenet, who's the 17th Earl of Warwick, the son of the Duke of Clarence. They are still alive and in the Tower. And the Catherine of Aragon's parents insist that they need to be executed, really. They need to be got rid of. That the threat needs to be extinguished. And so Edward Plantagenet, who was only 10 when he was taken into prison at the Tower of London because of his position, because of his blood, he is executed for supposedly trying to escape the Tower of London. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't, maybe he was maybe entrapped into it. But either way, that was the reason given for him to be executed. But we know that Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon had been pushing for that in order for Catherine to actually come to the country. So she finally gets here late after a horrendous sea journey. She gets here on the 2nd of October 1501. She should have landed at Plymouth. She lands at Southampton. The wedding, for the actual wedding, so an in-person wedding that there's going to be between her and Arthur, has to be postponed slightly because she is late. But they do get married at St Paul's Cathedral on the 14th of November 1501. Now, this again, Henry VII, excuse me, is not going to let this opportunity go by without using it for, again, this just reinforcement of this is your ruling dynasty. And there's nothing better really than a public ceremony like a wedding. We've seen it in our lifetime. There's nothing better than for raising public opinion. And it was actually the first public royal wedding for probably within living memory. And actually, not that they would have known it at the time, but they didn't get another one. Hello, Melissa. They didn't get another one because Henry VIII, all of Henry VIII's marriages were in private. So, and of course, Edward VI doesn't get married. So the next one is Mary at Winchester Cathedral, much, much later. So this is going to be a spectacle anyway. There are pageants put on all around the city of London. And then the ceremony itself, the couple wear white satin, which is quite incredible. The nave of St Paul's Cathedral has a raised walkway, put up through the middle, 700 foot long, and it is, and it was lined with, I think it was blue cloth or red cloth, held down by golden nails. A blue cloth was put on the processional route for Catherine to get from the Bishop's Palace into the cathedral, and she was escorted down the aisle by the 10-year-old Prince Henry. So it was a spectacle. You had wine fountains everywhere. There's a wine fountain in the shape of a big mountain, which that was a play on, and you'll see this actually throughout Tudor iconography. They like puns on their names. And if you saw did I do a live about Henry VII? I did, didn't I? And his yes, well, anyway, about his title, he would often refer to the Richmond title. Anyway, Richmond, Rich Mountain. This is the inspiration for the wine fountain where the mountain runs with wine. But there were just things I don't think I can't even imagine how this would look. Islands with trees with pomegranates on and all sorts of things. This was a huge, huge spectacle. They give gifts out, £14,000 worth of gifts. I don't know what that would be in today's money, but you've got to be talking £1.5 million, something like that, $2 million sort of thing. It's an hour-long ceremony, and then the couple walk back. Remember, they're both dressed in white. Apparently, this satin that they were wearing almost reflected the light. Doesn't appear to be. There's no comment that it was raining or anything like that. So perhaps it was even a little bit sunny. Don't know. And they walk back down the aisle hand in hand, and they wave to the crowd. Whether these gestures were planned or whether they were spontaneous, don't know. but they had the effect of, yeah, very expensive wedding. They have the effect of really warming the crowd to their future king and queen, to their current Prince and Princess of Wales. So it does the job. And then there's a few more days of celebrations, including a joust at the Palace of Westminster. Neither it's been commented that neither Arthur nor Henry take part in the joust. But Henry's 10, so I'm not completely sure whether he would be jousting at that age anyway. And we know Henry VII does forbid Henry, his son, to joust even as he gets older. The tilt yard has to be erected, so any of the stands that are required, anything that's required for the joust has to be put up, again at quite a large expense, at the Palace of Westminster. It's not until the reign of Henry VIII that we see permanent tilt yards for the joust being built at, for instance, Greenwich Palace, Hampton Court Palace. In fact, if you go to Hampton Court Palace, you can still, the Tilt Yard Cafe is called that because you are in one of the permanent towers that were used to watch the joust. But yeah, you don't actually see those till the reign of Henry VIII. But so that's all put. And then, of course, you have the never-ending question of what happened on the wedding night, of course. And this doesn't become an issue until Henry VIII is trying to file for divorce or petition the Pope for an annulment at the end of the 1520s. It's not commented upon at the time, particularly. It's assumed that the couple have consummated their marriage. There is a bedding ceremony where Catherine is laid on the bed on top of the covers, and Arthur is brought in and he lies on top of the covers next to her, and the Archbishop blesses the bed, and the couple are left to it, and everyone presumes that nature has taken its course. He's 15, she's 16. Oh, what I should mention, they have met a few days before the wedding as well, by the way. Bearing in mind that the negotiations for this wedding have been going on since they were small, since they were toddlers, maybe even babies. She has not been taught English, and he has not been taught Spanish. She has been taught, she seems to be more proficient in Latin than he is, because she isn't very impressed with the way he pronounces his words. So communication is difficult from the get-go in between this couple. Now, when they are in public, there are interpreters. There are maybe people who can help them. When they're in private, they're struggling. And I wonder whether that's a potential factor in whether or not they consummated their marriage that night. It was very difficult to actually get in the mood with someone you can't actually converse with. But like I say, that doesn't actually become a topic of conversation or questioned at all. Not even at the point that that Catherine marries Henry VIII later on, once Arthur's died. It comes up when they're trying to annul the marriage, when Henry's trying to annul the marriage, excuse me. But Arthur is known the next day to have come out of the bedroom and said something along the lines of, you know, get me a cup of ale, for I have this night been in the midst of Spain. He's 15. It could very well be a bit of a boast. He would have known what would have been expected of him there or soon after. And so we're already November. They then, so there's these sort of carry on these further celebrations that include things like the joust, and then they retire to Richmond and they spend time with Henry VII and Elizabeth of York, which may well be the longest amount of time Arthur has ever spent as a well, other than from when he was an absolute newborn with his parents, and presumably his grandmother Margaret Beaufort as well. But then they make their way, which in the probably one of the worst times of the year, they make their way back to Ludlow. And I mentioned earlier about how they how Arthur has been there since the age of 7, and now he's bringing back his wife with her huge entourage as well. So suddenly it's a mixture of men and women in the same space where they have been really just male dominated. Marie, their creepy parents struck a deal to marry them off since birth, yet no one thought to teach them, their languages. Apparently so. That apparently so. It seems incredible. Jenna says, one would think the English and Spanish lessons would have been a necessity, but I guess there was Latin. They probably did. You're right. They probably saw that they had would have thought they had a common language, and therefore he wouldn't have did Spanish. But it is curious. It is curious that she's not taught English. And that makes me wonder whether they were as committed to the marriage as the English were. That's my comment on that. So Marianne, wouldn't there have been a dispensation for Henry to marry Catherine? Yes, indeed, there was. There was a papal dispensation for Henry to marry Catherine because she had been married to his brother. But it doesn't appear to have been anything around. Well, in fact, David Starkey goes into this in quite a lot of detail in his Six Wives book, and I would thoroughly recommend at least reading this passage about it, because it talks about the language used in the dispensation, and the different factions want slightly different outcome. And it's a word, foran, I think it is, and it means perhaps, or it can mean perhaps. And so the dispensation says that you can read it two ways, that the marriage wasn't consummated, basically, that it was sort of unlikely, or that perhaps it was. I'm now butchering David Starkey's work, so pick up that book and have a look at that passage about it. He may have a YouTube video on it, of course. Catherine also has had an upbringing at court that Arthur hasn't had. She's so I get the feeling that she was far more sort of prepared for her role than perhaps he was. Right, sorry, Jenna, thank you very much. Yes, the Pope wrote in it basically that the marriage could happen even if she had slept with Arthur. Yes, so it was ambiguous the way he wrote it. Again, apparently due to this one word, foran. But anyway, so they head off to Ludlow, and I'll put Ludlow back up on my screen on Facebook and YouTube. Castle is lovely. Someone mentioned earlier in the comments on Instagram about the castle at Ludlow. It is still privately owned, and but it is in ruin, not due to the Civil War, as far as I understand, just due to neglect. Very significant in the time of the Wars of the Roses. It was a Yorkist. Yes, Yorkist stronghold. So Richard, Duke of York, had been here. In fact, there's one point, and if I have an interview with Matt Lewis on my YouTube channel, which is actually one of my first, it might be the first interview I ever did. And we're actually at Ludlow Castle, and he's talking about a time where where Richard, Duke of York, was there. Edward, his eldest son. So then George, Duke of Clarence, was there. Little Richard, was there. And so the children were actually in the same, all the family were in the same place at one time. And anyway, so Ludlow Castle has a long and interesting history. And it was, of course, Ludlow Castle where Edward V was as in his role as Prince of Wales, as a child, of course, but his formal role, although he probably wouldn't have done anything with it, was as head of the Council of Marches and Prince of Wales. He would have been at Ludlow Castle, and it was from Ludlow Castle on his journey down to London, ready for his coronation after the death of his father, Edward IV, that Richard, Duke of York. Richard, Duke of Gloucester, his uncle, who became Richard III, intercepted them, and we won't get into that rabbit hole today. But they went to Uncle Richard's daycare. So Ludlow, the place of the Prince of Wales. So he goes back there with his wife. He seems to be incredibly, he's popular in the area. He's been there a very long time. People are used to seeing him around. But he dies suddenly in April 1501. The week before had been Maundy Thursday, had been Easter the week before, and he had been out giving out alms. So he dies really, really quickly, and this is where you get the sort of looking at history backwards. Was Arthur always a little bit fragile because he was a premature baby, etc., etc.? It is known that the sweating sickness, I believe, was in the local area. And remember, he'd been out on Maundy Thursday the week before giving out alms, so he had been mixing with the people. Yes, Brianna, I was listening to Sean Cunningham. I've listened to so Brianna's just mentioned Sean Cunningham. He's got a biography on Arthur Tudor, and I have the name of it somewhere. No, I don't. Yes, I do. Oh, no, I don't. I've just written down he's done a biography. I think it's called something about the king's brother or something like that. Sorry, but anyway, if you look up Sean Cunningham, Sean Sean Cunningham, he's got a fantastic book. And I listened to an online lecture from Sean, and yeah, when I was prepping, and then a podcast when I was prepping for this. So Arthur dies really quickly, and like I say, there's been a discussion ongoing as to what he died of. Through from testicular cancer through to the sweating sickness that was in the area at the time. It does appear that Catherine fell ill. There's a dispatch from the Spanish ambassador to her parents, which they get a few months later. I think they receive it in the August, the timings of communications being such, which talks about Catherine being ill. But when her illness was is a bit harder to pinpoint. But Catherine recovers and Arthur dies. This is really hard to put into words just how devastating this was for the Tudor dynasty. If you think about everything they've been through up until this point, the winning at the Battle of Bosworth, the uprisings ever since, I mean, Henry VII is no angel, but really battling to stay on the throne, to show everyone he can do a good job. I mean, you don't really want to be one of the merchants in London who's being fined in order to swell his coffers, but in the previous year, the marriage negotiations with the Spanish, they're incredibly powerful, Isabella and Ferdinand, and for Henry VII to have pulled off a marriage negotiation between his son and their daughter And then they're 15 and 16, this couple. So surely children are about to come as well. They will follow soon, and the dynasty will be secure. They've got Henry VII and Elizabeth York have got 2 sons. One son is now married to a Spanish princess. They'll have children soon. It's all fine. We can all relax. It's coming together. This has all been worth it. And then, of course, Arthur dies. So Arthur, he dies at Ludlow Castle, and I have now read 2 different things about where his heart is buried. And I'm going to show you, I'm going to tell you about it on Instagram. I'm going to show you on YouTube and Facebook. In the town, there is a church called St. Lawrence's Church, and there is a plaque in there, and it reads, Arthur, Prince of Wales, died at Ludlow Castle, 2nd of April, 1502, aged 15 years and 7 months. Oh, sorry, it wasn't 16 by that. 15 years and 7 months. I'm crap at maths. His heart was buried near this place. But in another biography of Arthur, which I was dipping into earlier, it talks about his heart being buried in Ludlow, in the chapel in the castle, which was St. Mary of Magdalene. It's actually a circular chapel. You can get married there in a civil ceremony now. But I don't know if that's been a mix-up then, whether when reading the records, people who haven't been to the area assume that saying that his heart is buried in Ludlow meant Ludlow Castle. But certainly St. Lawrence's Church in the town have the plaque. They have taken ownership of saying, no, his heart is here. That wouldn't have been unusual, by the way, for the entrails, for the viscera to be buried near to or at the place where anyone actually of the nobility and upwards had spent the most of their time. Remembering Arthur has been here since he was 7, well known in the area. But he is then, his body is taken to be buried at Worcester. It's taken first back to Tickenhill Manor in Bewdley. And it is, and he lays he lays overnight at Tickenhill. He actually lays overnight in St. Lawrence's overnight, so that makes more sense that his heart is there. And then it's taken to Tickenhill for a night. Yes, his heart was buried separately from the rest of his body. That is, that's not unusual for the reason I just gave, but also because the bodies are embalmed. So for that to happen, all of the insides have to be cleaned out. He's buried at Worcester Cathedral. And like I say, his body rests overnight at Tickenhill Manor. Again, a place where people would have been familiar with him. And then it is taken to Worcester Cathedral. And I am not sure how, because I haven't looked at the records myself, so there's full disclosure. So if someone has actually written, if there is an account of the body going by road, fair enough. However, what I will say is if there isn't a record of how the body gets from Bewdley to Worcester, the river goes directly from really close to where the manor had been to Worcester Cathedral, which had a river entrance. Either way, the body gets to Worcester Cathedral, and there's a massive funeral service. The choice of Worcester may seem a little odd. It's not London. It's a little bit out of the way, but there is actually a king, also another king. Well, there is a king buried there. And obviously Arthur was a king in waiting. King John is buried there. Like him or loathe him, he was actually a king. We all loathe him. And also the thought goes that it is a significant enough place, but far away enough from London that it's not seen as the end of um of the dynasty. It's not seen as it's a setback, it's sad, it's clearly something that's devastating for the royal family and for the country, but it's okay. We have another one in the shape of Henry. So excuse me, I'm just gonna block someone. So yeah, Tickenhill Manor. I so wish it still existed. Um so yeah, so he's taken to Worcester. Now there's accounts of the so the body was first of all swathed in black cloth when it was uh when it was first sort of laying overnight in St Lawrence's and then Tickenhill. But for the funeral, there's a much more embellished cloth with gold needlework. And again, sorry, people on Instagram, I will try and describe it for you on FaceTube. I was about to say on Facebook and YouTube. You can actually see part of it. And if you're coming on the Rise of the Tudors tour, which is next September, then this is something that I am going to try and get for you to see. Marianne, was it the nearest cathedral? It actually wasn't. Hereford is apparently slightly nearer, which and it is, and it what I mean, the heavens opened. It was pathetic fallacy. The roads must have been absolutely awful, which is the other reason why I was questioning whether he was actually taken by road any further than was necessary. It's necessary, is it? Trying to think of my geography, to go from Ludlow to Bewdley by road, more direct. And yeah, I think that would make more sense. But then there's the river that would go from Bewdley to Worcester. It's just me, my conjecture, knowing the landscape. But yeah, so the gold, the funeral pall is it's incredibly detailed in terms of its embroidery. It would have sparkled, it would have shone, and the ceremony itself incredibly sad, as you would expect, and the staffs of office, his office, broken and put in the grave with him. So later on, because these things take time, a tomb is erected. A chantry, in fact, excuse me, is erected. Inside the chantry, again, I will explain it to you on Instagram, on Facebook and YouTube. You can see it. There is a tomb chest. So a tomb chest is exactly what it says on the tin, really. It's a chest, and the body isn't in the chest. Like I said earlier, he is. So as you look at the high altar, Arthur is buried, or Arthur's chantry is to the right. King John is buried in front of the high altar. That was his request. It was in his will. His will is in the archives still at Worcester. Again, another thing we'll be looking at when we go on there on the Rise of the Tudors tour next September. 3 spaces left if you want to come. Melissa's on it. Can't wait. So you can see around the chest tomb is the arms of England, but it is incredibly detailed on the outside as well. Oh, sorry, what I was going to say about the chest tomb as well is later, I think in the Victorian era, they actually excavated King John's grave, which is why there is a bit of his thumb in the library there. And he is then given a chest tomb as well. Before that, King John was actually, it was more like if you've ever seen the graves in the Templar Church in London, or where am I thinking of in France, where it's just a sort of quite shallow slab with their effigy on it. John's effigy is there and is original and is the oldest effigy with a likeness to the person in this country. Arthur doesn't have an effigy, interestingly enough. But so on the outside, think of Henry VII's chapel at Westminster Abbey and the decadence of the ceiling and sculptures everywhere and all sorts. Arthur's chantry is covered in heraldry. So if I just give you, you'll see some of it on maybe if I do this, you can see it a bit clearer. There we go, on Facebook and YouTube. It's incredibly detailed, like I say, covered in badges. If you went and saw it without knowing who you were looking at, you would just already know that you were looking at someone's tomb who was incredibly important. And then if you knew a little bit about heraldry, you would probably be able to start picking things out. So you have some obvious things like the Beaufort portcullis. The portcullis, of course, being the badge of Arthur's grandmother, Margaret Beaufort, or one of her badges. Beaufort means beautiful castle. So again, there's a bit of a tie to why it's a portcullis, how they decide on the visuals. You have the Order of the Garter, I think there. You have a pomegranate with a link to, of course, his wife, Catherine of Aragon. You have feathers of the Prince of Wales. A sheath of arrows, which is it's a representation of Catherine's mother, Isabella of Castile. So even though Arthur has died and this new marriage, this 5-month marriage, is over, the alliances that were to come with that marriage, and Catherine's still in the country, by the way, she never gets to go home. She, in fact, she becomes quasi Spanish ambassador, learns English incredibly quickly, and becomes basically Spanish ambassador for Henry VII. That's a bit of an aside. There we go. There's another rabbit hole. But yeah, these alliances, this alliance with Spain is still so important that the visuals for that, the iconography of that, it needs to be included on Arthur's chantry. And a chantry, as well, if you don't know, is literally for chanting prayers for the deceased, hence the name chantry. We also have the Tudor roses there, the red rose of York separately, the white rose of white rose of York, red rose of Lancaster, whoops, and the Tudor roses there. The Welsh dragon is on there, representing Henry VII's Welsh roots. The white greyhound of Richmond, one of the Richmond badges, is also there. It is absolutely covered. Is there any I've forgotten off my list? And the falcon and the fetterlock, which was Arthur's Arthur's maternal grandfather, so Edward IV's badge. It was actually his father's. It was the Duke of York's badge. The falcon and the fetterlock. You can see that a lot in Ludlow, actually, where they were based for a long time. So you have all of these emblems on his tomb. It's really quite impressive and superb. But he's died 15 months, 7 months. Thank you to the plaque at St. Lawrence's for reminding me the exact age he was. He doesn't even reach his 16th birthday. And it is just inevitable. It's something we cannot avoid, which is the what-ifery of if Arthur had lived. Makes you wonder if they hadn't consummated the marriage within 5 months, whether there was an issue, perhaps. So would there have been a long and successful and fruitful marriage with Catherine? Maybe the marriage would have lasted, but would there have been children? It's really, I suppose it's a little bit not pointless. I don't want to say pointless in a way, but it's difficult because there's so many elements that we just don't know. But he does appear to be popular. He does appear to be he has all the hopes of the Tudor dynasty on his shoulders, and no one seems to question that he will be perfectly capable of shouldering them. But if you are interested, and yeah, why would you not be? We are doing the Rise of the Tudors tour next September, and oh, Melissa's been watching excuse me, a Simon Thurley Gresham College lecture. Yes, well, we've just finished his book, haven't we? Houses of Power in book club. Simon Thurley on the Gresham College lectures. Check them out on YouTube. Very, very interesting. We have 3 spaces left on the Rise of the Tudors tour for next September, and we will be going to Winchester, which we've spoken about today. We will be going to Ludlow Castle. We will be going to St Lawrence's Church. We will be going to Worcester Cathedral. So we'll be seeing all those places that we've spoken about today. In addition to that, we'll be going to Gloucester Cathedral. We will be going to Pembroke Castle and Raglan Castle. I'm talking about the early stages of the Tudors, how they rose to power. It will be fabulous. So if you're interested in that, please jump on that soon. You can get all the details on my website, which is www.britishhistorytours.com. There's also links in bios and stuff. So there you go. That's quite cool. Before I go, tonight history. If you liked me swearing earlier, come back for History After Dark in a bit. We are on at 8:15 p.m. tonight, as we are most Wednesdays, every Wednesday, I'll say. Tonight, we are on to you, Uncle Norfolk. It's the 3rd Duke of Norfolk, Thomas Howard. He is the candidate for Deceased Git of the Year tonight. We'll be discussing him, so please come back for that later. We'll be on YouTube and Instagram. It's history.after.dark on Instagram and just History After Dark, I believe, on YouTube. On YouTube, also remember there is the interview with Dr. Jonathan Foyle. That is available. It's available on the podcast as well. And he's talking about, well, if you were here a few weeks ago, you'll know that I was getting rather angsty about the Henry VII and Elizabeth of York bed, which I interesting, picked up a postcard of that at Hever Castle last week when we were there on tour. And yes, well, you'll know if you watched it, but it's not on display, and it's not on display for various reasons. But if you listen to my interview with Dr. Jonathan Foyle, you will be able to find the full story behind why you can't go and see the bed. And lots of other interesting things about his quest for finding more and more Tudor artifacts and furniture. The interview with Nicola Tallis about Margaret Beaufort will be going live in October. I'll give you more of a heads up on that when we get closer. You might see behind me, you won't see it behind me on Instagram, but on YouTube and Facebook, I have 3 books behind me, and I have another one here with me. The books behind me are Anne and Elizabeth I by Tracy Borman, The Palace by Gareth Russell, and Pax by Tom Holland. And then, because I have this on, because I'm reading this at the moment, The Bone Chests, Unlocking the Secrets of the Anglo-Saxons, but by Kat Jarman. These 4 authors I got to see speak at the Gloucester History Festival this past weekend. The History Festival actually had gone on for 2 weeks, but with being on tour, I wasn't able to go until the very final weekend. It was so good. It was really good. If you are in the UK, or if you are thinking of traveling to or you are indeed, Melissa, traveling to the UK, then and it happens to coordinate around the time that it's on, then please do have a look at the program and have a look at going. They also have other events on throughout the year. So that, if for more information, you can go to gloucesterhistoryfestival.co.uk. That's their little leaflet. It's very good. Oh, there you go. gloucesterhistoryfestival.co.uk. It's not gonna. There you go. But it was really good. And the bone chests one, by the way, these bone chests So Melissa, you'll be interested in this. These are at Winchester Cathedral. I'd seen them there when I visited and was really intrigued by them. Anyway, good job. Kat's written a whole book on it. So I'm going to be reading that as well. I wish I was a quicker reader for the amount of books I need to read. Very soon, I will be announcing the Maria's already ordered packs. Good. And I can post a photo of the Bones book so that you can see it. Yes, I can. I also have I've been sent the latest Mary Beard book. Very excited about that as well. What was I about to say? Oh yes. So in book club, in the next couple of weeks, I will be announcing the long list of books, and patrons can then vote on which books they want, and we'll pick the top 5, and they will be our books for book club in 2024. So if you're interested in book club and you'd like a say in which books we are covering in 2024, look out for that post. Join if you're not already a patron. You can go to patreon.com/British History, and it's £5 a month. We do lots more than just book club in there. For instance, you get to ask your questions to historians that I'm interviewing. You get to submit your own questions. You also get 10% off event tickets. So for instance, for the online history festival, which we are having in November on the Tudors, you get your ticket for 10% less than everybody else. Melissa's going to order the bone chest. Yes, do. And then then you'll know all about it. We'll go into Winchester and geek out on them together. Right, everybody, I have been keeping you for over an hour. Thank you so much for sticking with me. Thank you for joining me. If you are around tonight, then I'll see you on History After Dark. Otherwise, I will see you live here this time next week. All right, everybody, I shall see you very soon. All right, bye-bye.